Welcome to your personalized deep dive.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Today, we are going to be tackling something that might sound a little dry at first.
Yeah.
Medieval fasting practices.
Ooh.
But trust me, this is way more interesting than it sounds.
Right.
We're going to be using these practices as like a window into the lives and beliefs of monks living over 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, what's so fascinating about this is we're not just talking about giving up chocolate for Lent or something like that. We're talking about like a meticulously detailed system of fasting that governed their entire year. And it gives us an incredible insight into their daily lives and what they valued.
Exactly. And to guide us through all of this, we have got a 10th century abbot.
Oh, wow.
Named Bertharius of Monte Cassino,
Right.
who literally wrote the book on this.
He did.
How to observe fasting throughout the year.
Catchy titles.
Right.
I like it.
Now, I know abbot might sound a bit intimidating.
Yeah.
But think of him kind of as the head honcho of a monastery.
The big guy.
Yeah. And his writings are so valuable because they give us this incredibly detailed, almost day-by-day look into the world of a medieval monastery.
It's like reading someone's diary from like the year 950.
Right. It's crazy.
We can see how their faith wasn't just something they thought about on Sundays, you know?
Yeah.
It was woven into every single aspect of their existence.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit.
Okay.
Bertharius lays out this super specific system of fasting.
All right.
Almost like a medieval fasting calendar.
I love it.
Right. And he divides the year into 4 seasons.
Okay.
And each one has its own designated fasting periods.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
He doesn't just say, okay, you fast during Lent.
Right.
He gives us the exact days of the week, how long the fast lasts, and even how many Bible readings you're allowed to do.
Seriously, that level of detail, that's what's so fascinating.
Yeah.
It really emphasizes like the discipline and rigor that was at the heart of monastic life.
Yeah.
For these monks, fasting wasn't just about like skipping a meal. It was a meticulously planned spiritual practice.
Totally. So, for example, he says, during the first week of the first month, you fast on Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday.
Wow.
And get this.
Okay.
You would be limited to 12 Bible readings until evening.
Oh my gosh.
Could you imagine?
That's some serious dedication.
Right.
I mean, could you imagine planning your entire year around these fasting periods?
I know, it's wild.
It really makes you appreciate their commitment to their faith, doesn't it?
It does. It really does.
It also highlights just how central fasting was to their understanding of seeking forgiveness and growing spiritually.
Totally. And speaking of forgiveness,
Yeah.
Bertharius actually says that properly observing these 12 fasts throughout the year is like paying a fine for your sins.
What?
He even compares it to paying 100 gold coins.
Seriously?
I know.
That's wild. So that really shows us the direct link they saw between fasting and seeking atonement.
Right.
It wasn't just about like feeling hungry, you know. Yeah.
It was about actively working to purify yourself.
Right.
And essentially earn forgiveness for your wrongdoings.
Yeah. And then he even goes on to say that these fasts can free the soul.
Wow.
Now I'm curious, what kind of freedom are we talking about here?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So in their theology, this kind of freedom was all about breaking free from like the chains of sin and worldly desires. They believed that by denying yourself physically through fasting, you could kind of elevate your spirit and move closer to God.
So it wasn't just about depriving your body, it was about transforming your spirit.
Precisely. And it's interesting because this idea of finding freedom through self-discipline, it's something that still resonates with people today, even if we express it in different ways.
Right.
Think about things like, you know, intense workout regimens or committing to a strict diet.
Yeah.
It's that same idea of pushing yourself to achieve something greater.
Totally. Now, you might think this whole fasting system was super rigid, you know, like set in stone.
Right.
But it actually wasn't.
Bertharius outlines all these different feast days with their own specific rules about fasting.
Interesting.
Some days you had to fast until evening, others until the 9th hour, which, by the way, was kind of like their afternoon snack time.
Okay.
And some days no fasting at all.
So this variety is really interesting because it shows us that even within this strict system, there was room for flexibility.
Totally. And it kind of raises a question for me.
Okay.
Why were some saints' days considered more important, requiring stricter fasts?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if it reflects like how highly they regarded certain saints.
Or
Or maybe it tells us something about how significant those specific holidays were, in their calendar.
Right. Like were they big celebrations with feasting
Right.
or more solemn occasions?
Exactly. And it's these little details that give us clues about their beliefs and practices
Yeah.
that go way beyond just the act of fasting itself.
It's like piecing together a giant puzzle where each little piece reveals a little bit more about their world.
Totally. I can only imagine trying to keep track of all these dates and exceptions.
Oh, yeah.
It'd be so hard.
It definitely shows how dedicated they were to their religious practice.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just about following a few simple rules.
Yeah.
It was about navigating this intricate web of traditions and exceptions.
Okay, but here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Bertharius also mentions practices that weren't even in the Rule of St. Benedict, which was basically the official rule book for monks at the time.
Yeah.
Like he talks about not eating at the 9th hour, remember, afternoon snack time, until after the grape harvest was done.
So that's a key detail because it suggests there was a degree of flexibility and adaptation built into the system.
Right.
These additions to the rules could have been regional customs, or maybe even show us how their interpretation of the original rules kind of evolved over time.
So even within this really structured system, there was room for practicality and the influence of local customs.
Absolutely. It reminds us that even the most rigid systems can bend and change.
Right.
Especially when you're dealing with the day-to-day realities of life in a particular community.
Totally.
And they were living in a rural community, closely tied to the land. Their lives revolved around the agricultural cycle.
Right.
Which probably explains why things like the Great Harvest, had an impact on their fasting practices.
It makes total sense.
Right.
We often think of monasteries as being like cut off from the world.
Right.
But they were very much a part of their local environment and their economy.
Right. And it's fascinating to see how these seemingly small, everyday details actually tell us so much about their worldview.
Yeah.
And their daily lives.
It's like we're getting a glimpse into their world, not just through the big official rules, but through these little cracks where we can see the real people living and working and trying to make sense of their faith. So we've seen the structure of their fasting calendar, the connection to seeking forgiveness and finding spiritual freedom, the exceptions they made for feast days, and even how they adapted the rules to fit their lives. A pretty amazing picture, wouldn't you say?
It is, and it makes you wonder how all of this connects to how we think about fasting today.
Right.
Bertharius saw it as a path to atonement and spiritual freedom.
Yeah.
But how do we approach it in the modern world?
That's such a good question. I mean, for a lot of people today, fasting might be more about their health or personal discipline than about religion. Like you might fast to lose weight.
Right.
Or maybe just to challenge yourself mentally.
And even within religious contexts, people fast for different reasons and in different ways.
Yeah.
Some might fast as a form of protest or to advocate for social justice.
Oh, wow.
Others might see it as a way to connect with their faith on a deeper level.
It's incredible how this text from centuries ago can still spark these relevant conversations today.
Right.
We're still grappling with these same questions about self-control, spirituality, and our connection to something bigger than ourselves.
It really speaks to the enduring power of these fundamental human questions, doesn't it?
Totally.
And it challenges us to think about our own personal relationship with fasting. What are our motivations?
Yeah.
What are we hoping to achieve?
Right.
Are we seeking forgiveness, freedom, better health, or something else entirely?
And how can we learn from these ancient practices, even if our lives and beliefs are totally different?
It's all about finding those connections across time and recognizing that human beings have always struggled with these timeless questions.
Well said.
Okay.
So we've traveled back in time to a medieval monastery, explored the world of monastic fasting, and even found some unexpected links to our own lives today. It's been quite a journey.
It has, and I hope it's given our listener a new appreciation for how complex history really is.
Yeah.
And how powerful traditions can be, even after all these centuries.
I think it has. And before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. Bertharius focused on fasting as a way to achieve forgiveness and spiritual freedom. But what other benefits might fasting have, both physically and mentally?
That's a fascinating question, and one that researchers are actually exploring more and more these days. There's growing evidence that fasting could have a whole range of health benefits.
Oh, wow.
From improving heart health to boosting brain function. It's definitely something worth looking into.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as you go about your day, maybe take a moment to think about this ancient practice in a modern context.
Yeah.
You might be surprised at what you discover about yourself and the power of something as simple as choosing not to eat for a while.
It's true. You might even find yourself wanting to learn more about Bertharius and his world.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Imagine reading his actual words.
I know.
It's like having a conversation across the centuries.
It really is. And, those conversations can be surprisingly relevant to our lives today, even if they started 1,000 years ago.
Totally will. That wraps up our deep dive into the fascinating world of medieval fasting. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure. And whether you decide to try fasting or not, we hope you've come away with a deeper understanding of this ancient practice and how it connects to our lives today.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.